Tell us about the strange luck that kept you alive. I was hiking alone in the wilderness, minding my own business, when I ran into two strange men. At first, they seemed nice enough, but then they started following me down the trail. I could tell something was off about them, so I picked up my pace, hoping to lose them, but they wouldn't let up, and soon it became clear that they had sinister intentions. As I hurried along the path, the men caught up to me and attacked. They started beating me up, and I realized they were trying to sexually assault me. I wasn't about to let that happen without a fight, though. I may have been in trouble, but I wasn't going down without a struggle. Using the combat skills I had learned from my years of training, I fought back with everything I had. I managed to land some good hits, and I think it caught the men by surprise. They hadn't expected me to put up such a fierce resistance. Eventually, they must have realized that the battle was costing them too much, because they decided to cut their losses and flee. I was a mess after the attack, but I knew I had to keep moving. The hike back to civilization was long and arduous, but I was determined to make it out. I had survived a horrific ordeal, and I wasn't about to let it keep me down. Looking back, I can hardly believe the sheer luck that kept me alive that day. If I hadn't been so well prepared and willing to fight, the outcome could have been much worse. It's a miracle I made it out of there in one piece. I may have a few scars, both physical and emotional, but I'm alive, and that's what matters most. Story 2. It was a night I'll never forget. My friend and I were at a house party when everything suddenly took a turn for the worse. Some guy started harassing my buddy, and before I knew it, they were in a full-blown brawl. I couldn't just stand by and watch, so I jumped in to try and pull the guy off. That's when things took an even darker twist. The attacker pulled out a knife and plunged it right into my stomach. The pain was excruciating, but I wasn't about to let him get away. I fought through the agony, and the attacker eventually fled the scene, jumping into a waiting getaway vehicle. The police were called, and they quickly apprehended the guy. We were supposed to go to court and identify him as the one who stabbed me, but the day before the trial, he ended up pleading guilty. I never found out what happened to him after that, or what his punishment was. But to be honest, I don't really care. I'm just glad he's off the streets. As for me, I'm incredibly lucky to be alive. The wound was serious, but somehow, I managed to make a full recovery. These days, I barely even think about it. Sure, I get a little uneasy when someone's wielding a knife, but other than that, I'm pretty much back to normal. It's funny how life can change in an instant, isn't it? One minute, I was just enjoying a night out with my friend, and the next, I was fighting for my life. But through it all, I kept my cool and refused to let that guy win. I may have a scar to show for it, but I wear it like a badge of honor, a reminder that I'm a survivor, and that no matter what life throws at me, I'll always come out on top. Story 3. It all started with a simple phone call. I was waiting at the bus stop, minding my own business, when my partner called with a warning. There had been a stabbing in the area, and I was urged to stay safe. Little did I know, that call would end up saving my life. Just a few minutes later, a strange man crossed the street and approached me. Without warning, he swung a wooden fence post and struck me right in the head. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was lying on the ground, blood pouring from my injury. It was a terrifying and disorienting experience. In a daze, I somehow managed to stand up and start running. I think the attacker was caught off guard that I was able to get up, because he didn't try to stop me. As I fled, I narrowly avoided being hit by a car, but I made it to a nearby pharmacy, where the amazing staff immediately jumped into action to help me. Later, I learned that the man who attacked me had stabbed and killed a 24-year-old just 30 minutes before he came after me. The realization that I had likely been his next victim made me break down in tears. I couldn't believe how close I had come to losing my life. The recovery was long and difficult, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of being attacked so randomly and violently really shook my trust in strangers. But I was determined to push through it, and with the support of my family and friends, I eventually started to heal. 2 years later, the attacker went to trial, where he was sentenced to a mental institution. That was another harrowing experience, especially when I met the mother of the man he had killed. Seeing her heartbreak and grief was almost too much to bear. Looking back, I still can't believe I survived that ordeal. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't been able to get up and run, I might not be here today. It's a sobering thought, but it also fills me with a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance I was given. I may have scars, both physical and emotional, but I'm alive, and that's what matters most. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. It was just another routine call, or so I thought. My junior colleague and I responded to a report of a pregnant woman in distress. When we arrived, the woman was sitting on the floor, her legs bent and a blanket covering her lower body. There was a small table next to her with a glass top and wooden frame. My colleague asked to examine the woman, but for some reason she refused and insisted that I be the one to do it. Hesitantly, I knelt down to lift the blanket, when suddenly there was a loud crash. My colleague had put her foot through the glass table and was now standing on the patient's hand, which was holding a large knife. It turns out the woman had planned to stab one of the paramedics, and she had chosen me as her target. My quick-thinking colleague had seen the knife just in time and acted to save my life. Later, we learned that the woman had already had several children who had been placed in the care system due to fetal alcohol syndrome. When the next child was born, I was asked to provide a statement, and that child was also taken into care. The woman managed to avoid serious consequences for the attempted murder due to her mental health issues. It was a harrowing experience, but I'm grateful my colleague was there to protect me and prevent a tragedy. Story 4. It wasn't me, but my sister, who experienced this terrifying ordeal. I'll never forget the night I caught it happening. I was about 15 years old and I had fallen asleep on the couch. Suddenly, I woke up to strange sounds coming from the vent that led to my sister's room in the basement. The sounds were like her muffled voice with quick bursts of her entire voice, but she wasn't using any words. Then I heard her clearly say, "No," and I knew something was very, very wrong. My sister had a live-in boyfriend at the time. I immediately ran to my mom's room and said, "Something is wrong with sister's name, run." My mom took off down those stairs with incredible speed and strength, bursting through the door. I heard her yell, "Get off of her! What are you doing?" It turned out the boyfriend was strangling my sister, had taped her mouth shut, and had a knife by his side. By that point, my sister was turning blue. Long story short, the boyfriend's mom was friends with the town judge, and he managed to avoid any jail time. He went on to kill another young mother, and we later learned he had a history of strange, abusive behavior, typical of an evolving psychopath. He's now in prison, but the trauma of that night will never leave me. Story 5. I was working as a support worker, caring for people with mental and physical disabilities. One of my clients, a young woman, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder. Her struggles stemmed from a difficult childhood and substance abuse issues. One day, after I advised her against using nicotine gum, something snapped. Without warning, she turned on me and stabbed me 3 times in the chest. One of the blows struck my heart, piercing the right ventricle and severing a major artery. I was in grave danger, with doctors saying I only had a 3% chance of survival, given the severity of my injuries. Somehow, miraculously, I pulled through. But the trauma has left deep scars, both physical and emotional. I'm still recovering, both from the physical wounds and the PTSD that haunts me. My client's violent outburst has completely upended my life, leaving me questioning my identity and my future. I dedicated my career to helping people, but now I'm struggling to regain a sense of purpose. The incident has shaken me to the core, and I'm not sure I'll ever be the same. All I know is that I have a long road ahead, filled with both physical rehabilitation and the hard work of healing the emotional wounds that refuse to mend. Story 6. I'll never forget the horrors I endured with my abusive ex-partner. The violence escalated to the point where he nearly took my life. One day, he left me for dead after brutally attacking me. I barely escaped with my life. It happened when my ex-partner put my head through the car window, then dragged me inside and threw me onto the bathroom floor. I woke up drowning in my own blood, face down. In that moment, I summoned every ounce of strength to get away. I managed to call my mom, who quickly got me a taxi to a hotel out of his area. My injuries were so severe that I couldn't even fly home the next day. My mom had to drive across state lines to come pick me up. The police were utterly uncooperative, barely investigating the incident and dismissing it as a domestic dispute. I was exhausted from the whole ordeal and just wanted to move on. But a year later, I learned my ex had dated another woman and brutally murdered her, cutting off her head and dismembering her body. He's now serving a 25 to life sentence in prison. That traumatic event with my ex has left deep scars that will never fully heal. I'm just grateful to have survived his murderous rage. But the thought of what he did to that poor woman haunts me. I'll carry the weight of this experience for the rest of my life. Story 7. I'll never forget the night my mom came into my room and stabbed me in the chest. I was around 12 years old, just sleeping peacefully, when she burst in with a kitchen knife. She plunged it right into me, puncturing my lung. I woke up with a start, not even realizing what had happened at first. All I knew was that I had to get away. I rolled out of bed and ran around the house, screaming for help. Luckily, one of our neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. But before they could arrive, my mom started choking me. I lost consciousness, unsure if I would ever wake up again. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, recovering from my injuries. It turned out the knife had really messed me up, but the doctors were able to patch me up. This wasn't the only time my mom tried to hurt me. She was incredibly abusive, both physically and emotionally. But that night was by far the most dramatic and the closest she came to actually killing me. I'm just grateful that someone was there to call for help, because I don't know if I would have survived otherwise. Now my mom is in jail where she can't hurt me anymore. It's been a long, difficult road to heal from everything she put me through, but I'm alive, and that's what matters most. I'll never forget how close I came to losing my life that night, and it's a reminder to me every day about how precious life is. I'm just thankful to have been given a second chance. Story 8. I'll never forget the day my mom's life was turned upside down. It was just before lunchtime when a man broke into her house and attacked her and her maid. He stabbed them multiple times and kept punching them, all while they begged for their lives. My mom told me later that she played dead, hoping the man would leave. And eventually he did, exhausted from the violence. As soon as she was sure he was gone, my mom checked on the maid to make sure she was still alive. Somehow, against all odds, they both survived the brutal assault. The police never found the man who attacked them, but my mom knew exactly who he was. Turns out he was the boyfriend of one of her employees, a nice gay guy who worked at her flower shop. Apparently, the boyfriend was high on drugs and looking for money. When his boyfriend refused to give him any, he decided to take it out on my mom instead. Since the attack, my vibrant, outgoing mom has become reclusive and developed various health problems. She's always in pain, which has led her to become dependent on pain medication. Sadly, those meds have started to ruin her kidneys and liver, and now she's undergoing dialysis. I can't even imagine the trauma my mom has been through. One minute, she was just going about her day, and the next, she was fighting for her life. The fact that she survived is nothing short of a miracle. But the after effects have been devastating. She's had to completely change her lifestyle and face so many new challenges. It's heartbreaking to see my once strong mom struggle so much. But I'm in awe of her resilience. She could have easily given up, but instead, she's pushing forward, determined to reclaim her life. I'll always be grateful that she survived that horrific attack, and I'll do whatever I can to support her as she continues to heal, both physically and emotionally. Story 9. I can't even imagine the sheer terror my friend's mom must have felt that day at the office. A co-worker of hers had become completely obsessed with her, convinced that he was the only one who deserved her. And one day, he took that twisted fantasy to the most horrific extreme. My friend told me that the man came to their office with a revolver, intent on harming the woman he claimed to love. As she was bending down to put some files away, he quickly approached her from behind and shot her in the back. Then, before she could even react, he turned the gun on himself and took his own life. It's absolutely chilling to think about how quickly that situation escalated. If my friend's mom had been standing or facing the man, there's a very real chance she wouldn't have survived. But somehow, against all odds, she did. The wounds were significant, but miraculously she avoided being hit in the spine or any major organs. I know my friend has said that his mom made a mostly full recovery, though she still deals with chronic pain and PTSD from the ordeal. It's understandable that she would be terrified of guns after something like that. I can't even begin to imagine how traumatic it must have been for her. What's most incredible is that my friend and his mom are both alive today. If the shooter had approached from a different angle, or if he had been a better shot, this could have been an unimaginably tragic story. But instead, it's one of sheer luck and resilience. My friend's mom may have been scarred by what happened, but she refused to let it destroy her. She was able to return to work and live her life, albeit with some lingering challenges. I admire her strength and determination in the face of such a horrific experience. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. Story 10. In 2012, my life changed forever. I was simply trying to earn a living, delivering pizzas while attending air traffic controller school, when I was suddenly caught in the crosshairs of a violent crime. 3 attackers set upon me, and in the chaos, I was shot. I somehow survived the ordeal, but the aftermath was devastating. The trauma-induced seizures I experienced as a result disqualified me from my chosen career path. All of my hard work and dedication to becoming an air traffic controller was suddenly for naught. Of the 3 attackers, one met a grim fate, dying in a motorcycle crash before they ever faced trial. The other 2, however, were back on the streets by 2016, a bitter pill for me to swallow. Their defense was that they had no prior knowledge of their friend's violent plans and that he had acted alone. While I find that hard to believe, it seems the prosecution was unable to prove otherwise. In the end, the 2 remaining assailants took a plea deal, admitting only to second-degree assault. I had the opportunity to speak with the prosecutor beforehand, but was made to understand that the state, not the victim, ultimately calls the shots when it comes to prosecution. This experience has changed me in ways I never could have imagined. When I see statues or memorials erected for individuals who have committed heinous acts, I'm filled with a profound sense of injustice. I can't help but wonder how I would feel if the roles were reversed and tributes were being paid to my own attackers. The road to recovery has been long and arduous. I may have survived the initial assault, but the emotional and psychological scars remain. The trust I once had in the world has been shattered, and I find myself constantly on guard, wary of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of others. Yet despite all the hardship, I've managed to forge a new path for myself. I've found a fulfilling career as a software developer, putting my skills and intellect to work in a field that allows me to thrive. It's not the life I had envisioned, but it's one that I'm grateful for nonetheless. This experience has taught me the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. It's a sobering reminder that the unthinkable can happen to anyone at any time. But it has also instilled in me a deep well of resilience and a determination to never let the actions of others define me. I am a survivor, and I will continue to move forward, one step at a time. Story 11. I was just 17 years old when my life took an unimaginably dark turn. It all started when I fell terribly ill one weekend. Strep throat, my mother had decided I needed to go to the hospital. Little did I know, that decision would lead to a life-altering chain of events. My mother, being a severe alcoholic, had been drinking heavily that day. When we arrived at the hospital, the nurse at the discharge desk refused to let my mother drive me home, knowing full well she was intoxicated. This sent my mother into a drunken rage, with her swearing and threatening the nurse. The nurse warned that the police would be called if my mother tried to leave with me. Furious, my mother grabbed me and rushed me into the car. As we drove off, I pleaded with her, scolding her for her irresponsible behavior and the way alcohol was ruining her life. This only enraged her further. Instead of taking the normal route home, she veered down a dark, back-road main highway, speeding at over 90 miles per hour. Suddenly, as I begged her to slow down, she looked over at me with a blank stare and uttered the chilling words, "I'm sorry." In that moment, she yanked the emergency brake and wrenched the steering wheel, sending our car careening off the road. The next thing I remember is waking up in the front seat of a pickup truck, an EMT shining a light in my eyes. Apparently, I had miraculously crawled from the wreckage and staggered to a nearby home, asking for help. We were rushed back to the hospital, where the same nurse who had refused to let my mother drive me home greeted us with a somber, "I knew you'd be back." My mother was in and out of consciousness, repeatedly apologizing and telling me she loved me. It turned out she had suffered several broken bones, while I had a concussion and some cuts from the shattered glass. She was sentenced to an alcohol rehabilitation program and community service, but the trauma of that night never left her. Tragically, just 6 months later, my mother took her own life in another car accident. The last words I ever said to her were when she asked if I wanted to join her for a ride that night. I told her no, that I would see her when she got home. I'll never know if things might have been different if I had gone with her. This experience has left an indelible mark on my soul. The sheer terror of that night, coupled with the devastating loss of my mother, is something I'll carry with me forever. But it has also instilled in me a deep resilience and a determination to never take a single moment for granted. I am a survivor, and I will honor my mother's memory by living my life to the fullest. Story 12. I can't even begin to imagine the sheer terror my sister must have felt that day at the mall. She was simply trying to go about her normal routine, heading to work at the retail store she had been employed at for years. But in one horrifying moment, her life was turned upside down. My sister had stopped to use the restroom, unaware of the danger that lurked inside. As she was washing her hands, she noticed a man standing behind her in the mirror. When she made eye contact with him, he suddenly sprang into action, pulling a makeshift rope from a garbage bag and wrapping it tightly around her neck. The security footage later showed the man brutally choking my sister until she lost consciousness. He then proceeded to slam her to the ground and stomp on her head repeatedly. By the time another mall-goer found her, she was covered in blood, her face badly disfigured. The injuries my sister sustained were absolutely devastating. She broke her jaw and lost several teeth, and the long-term effects on her brain are still unknown. But the emotional scars may be even deeper. She now suffers from severe PTSD, haunted by the memory of that horrific attack. Authorities believe the attack may have been some sort of gang initiation, a random act of violence perpetrated by a complete stranger. The thought of that is just sickening. My sister did nothing to provoke this. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And she almost paid the ultimate price. Thankfully, the man responsible is now serving a lengthy prison sentence. But that does little to ease the trauma my sister has endured. She's had to undergo extensive medical treatment and rehabilitation, all while grappling with the psychological fallout of her experience. I'm in awe of my sister's resilience, but the road to recovery has been agonizingly slow. She'll never be the same person she was before that day. The physical and emotional wounds may never fully heal, but I'll be by her side every step of the way, doing whatever I can to support her as she works to reclaim her life. No one should have to go through something so horrific. My sister's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the senseless violence that can so easily shatter it. But it's also a testament to the human spirit and the power of determination. I know that with time and love, my sister will find a way to move forward, forever changed but unbroken. Story 13. When my husband decided to buy a PlayStation 5 through an online marketplace, I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I warned him over and over again that this was a recipe for disaster, that he was going to get robbed. But determined to make sure the console was in working order, he insisted on having the seller come to our home. Sure enough, as soon as the young man arrived, he pulled a gun on my husband and demanded the cash. In the chaos that followed, my husband was shot in the abdomen, and the second bullet from the gunman's weapon tore through the stairs, traveling 30 to 40 feet into our kitchen. Hearing the commotion, I rushed downstairs, intent on chasing the thief away from our home. As I reached the front gate, he turned the gun on me, firing a shot that missed my head by mere inches. It was a miracle that I emerged from that encounter unscathed. The gunman, a 16-year-old, was later apprehended and charged as an adult for 2 counts of attempted murder, as well as a slew of other offenses. But for my husband and I, the trauma of that day will linger for a long, long time. My husband's gunshot wound was serious, and the recovery process has been difficult and painful. He's had to undergo multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation, all while grappling with the emotional fallout of the attack. As for me, the image of that gun pointed at my head is seared into my memory, haunting my every waking moment. We're both incredibly grateful to have survived this harrowing ordeal, but the scars, both physical and emotional, will take time to heal. It's a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most seemingly innocuous of situations. I only wish I had been more persistent in convincing my husband to reconsider his plan. Moving forward, we'll be far more cautious and vigilant, never again letting our guard down in the face of potential threats. And we'll continue to support one another, drawing strength from our love and determination to overcome this trauma. This experience has shaken us to our core, but it has also steeled our resolve to never let it define us. Story 13. I'll never forget the night I was at my friend's house when a complete stranger suddenly burst through the balcony door, intent on causing harm. The man was shouting obscenities, and I knew I had to protect my friend from whatever he had planned. As I stood up to confront him, everything happened in a blur. In the darkness, I couldn't even see the knife in his hand until it was too late. He plunged it directly into my face. The pain was excruciating, and I can still feel the scar that mark left on my skin. Afterward, we learned from a mutual friend that the intruder had actually come to the house with the intention of murdering my friend. He had no idea I would be there, and his answer when asked about it was chilling. I was going to murder her, but didn't know Sebla was there too. This wasn't the first time I'd been the victim of a stabbing attack, and tragically, it wouldn't be the last. In total, I now have 5 scars from these violent encounters, a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most ordinary of situations. The physical and emotional toll of these experiences has been immense. The recovery process is never easy, and the trauma lingers long after the wounds have healed. But through it all, I've tried to maintain my resolve, determined not to let these horrific events define me. I'm only 23 years old, yet I've already faced more violence and senseless cruelty than anyone should have to endure in a lifetime. But in the face of such darkness, I've found a deep well of strength and resilience. I refuse to be a victim, and I'll continue to stand up and protect those I care about, no matter the cost. This latest attack has only reinforced my belief that we must all be vigilant, always on the lookout for potential threats. The world can be a dangerous place, but by staying alert and looking out for one another, we can minimize the risks. It's a harsh lesson, but one that I'm determined to heed. As I move forward, scarred both inside and out, I'll carry the memory of these experiences with me. They've shaped me in ways I could never have imagined, but they haven't broken me. I'm a survivor, and I'll keep fighting no matter what life throws my way. Story 15. It was supposed to be a routine trip back home from a night out in the bustling bars of Chiang Mai, Thailand, a path I had walked countless times before. Little did I know, my life was about to take a terrifying turn. As I made my way down the familiar streets and alleys, cutting through the center of the city towards the moat in my apartment, I noticed a group of men hanging out on the corner near the technical college. I didn't pay them much mind. They were just part of the vibrant nightlife I had grown accustomed to. But as I entered the final alley, everything changed in an instant. 2 mopeds zoomed out from an alcove, cutting me off. Before I could even react, 4 men hopped off the bikes and one of them approached, asking, "Where are you going?" and then decking me right in the face. In that moment, as I processed what just happened, the assailant raised his arm, swinging something at me. Instinctively, I put my arms up to protect my face, and that's when the blows started raining down. I tried to turn and run, but his friends were there to block my escape. After what felt like an eternity, the men hopped back on their bikes and sped off. That's when I looked down at my arm, and the sight made my blood run cold. My left forearm, just below the wrist, had been cut nearly all the way through. One of my bones was completely exposed, the marrow visible. Despite the severity of the injury, I didn't feel any pain, but I knew I needed help, and fast. I made my way to a nearby guest house, the attendant nearly fainting when she saw the gruesome wound. She quickly got me in her car and drove me the short distance to the Ram Hospital, just steps away. The doctors confirmed that the weapon used was a machete. I had thought it was some kind of rod or cane. The damage was extensive, but miraculously, no major arteries had been severed. After extensive treatment and rehabilitation, I regained full function of my arm and hand. It was a harrowing experience, one that could have ended much worse. But I refused to let it ruin the incredible opportunity I had to live and work in Thailand for a year. My friends urged me to come home, but I wasn't about to let this attack define me or my experience. The emotional scars, however, have taken much longer to heal. For years, I turned to alcohol to dull the memories and the PTSD that haunted me. But recently, I've found the courage to confront my demons head-on. I've quit drinking, started therapy, and I'm finally addressing the trauma that's been hiding in the depths of my mind. It hasn't been an easy journey, but I'm determined to reclaim my life and move forward. This attack may have left its mark, but it hasn't broken me. I'm a survivor, and I'll keep fighting to overcome the darkness, one day at a time. The path ahead may be difficult, but with the support of loved ones and the strength I've found within myself, I know I can emerge from this even stronger than before. Story 16. As a child, I found myself caught in the middle of a deeply troubled relationship between my father and his girlfriend. Looking back, it's clear now that the dynamic between them was incredibly abusive, both physically and emotionally. But at the time, I was just a kid, desperate to avoid rocking the boat and losing the only parental figure I had. The girlfriend's son, who was a few years older than me, was particularly aggressive. He would constantly try to push me around and even hit me, but I never dared to tell my father, afraid of jeopardizing his relationship. One day, as the adults were engaged in another heated argument, the son once again set his sights on me. In a desperate attempt to protect myself, I sat on top of him, using my larger size to my advantage. I told him I would get up if he left me alone, and he reluctantly agreed. But then, in a horrifying twist, he turned the tables and climbed on top of me, wrapping his hands around my neck. I tried to cry out for help, reaching towards my father, but the words wouldn't come. It felt as if I was being pulled away, my consciousness slipping. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe I may have passed out or come dangerously close to it. When I finally came to, the girlfriend and her son were gone. I never saw them again, though I later learned that my father had received an anti-wedding invitation from her, furious that he had ended the relationship. From what my dad told me, her anger was directed not just at him, but at her own son as well. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what the son's true intentions were. Was he simply lashing out, or was there a more sinister plan to actually take my life? It's a chilling thought, but one I've had to grapple with over the years. Surprisingly, this traumatic experience hasn't left me as scarred as one might expect. Perhaps it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, or maybe I've just learned to bury the memory deep down. Regardless, I know that I'm lucky to have survived, and I'm grateful for the support and love of my father, who has been there for me through it all. This ordeal has certainly shaped me in ways I can't fully comprehend, but it hasn't broken me. I've learned to be more vigilant, more cautious in my dealings with others, and I've vowed to never let the darkness of that day define me or my future. I am a survivor, and I will continue to move forward one step at a time. Story 17. My heart dropped when I saw this question. I was 15 years old and my dad plotted to murder me. My dad had only been back around for a few months after being homeless for a while due to his long-term meth addiction. He had never been violent towards me before, but I later found out he had tried to kill my mother just months prior, and she had brushed it off as him having a PTSD episode. I came home from school, and he surprised me by suffocating me with a pillow and attempting to sexually assault me. I had just gotten a boyfriend and wasn't around as often, and the way he spoke during the attack made it clear that this was the source of his anger. He had turned the TV volume up extremely high so no one could hear me scream. I managed to get up and run to the bathroom, which was the only room in the house with a lock. He grabbed the door, but I found a sharp object in the bathroom and told him to back up or I'd kill him. Somehow, I was able to shove the door shut and lock it. He tried to get in, but couldn't. He said, "I'm leaving," and opened and closed the front door, trying to lure me out. It was quiet for a while, but then I heard him breathing outside the door. He eventually left after a few hours, taking the money I had hidden in my bedroom, and called a relative, telling them I'd been in a terrible accident and he needed a ride to the hospital. He ended up running when he was dropped off and was missing for a year. It was the most terrifying year of my life. His body was eventually found by a fisherman at his favorite lake, growing up. They found high levels of meth in his system, and it appeared to be a suicide. Later, when investigating the home I was attacked in, they found hammers, duct tape, and knives under my mom's mattress, and it looked like he had very much intended to kill me. The craziest part of it all was that my dad from my childhood was still there, simultaneously with the horrible attacker. He cried outside the door for a while, telling me he was so sorry and I would never see him again, but then he would switch to trying to lure me out and being aggressive. There were many moments where I could hear the duality of who he was, the murderous, cracked-out crazy person and someone who was regretful and really sad inside. It's not always just so cut and dry between a crazy, bad person and a good, normal person, I've learned. Story 18. While I was moving to a new work location, I was staying with a cousin of mine. Her ex-boyfriend, who was psychotic, alcoholic, and addicted to drugs, was stalking her. He had just been kicked out of her house. When he saw me move in, he assumed I was her new boyfriend. One night, he waited outside her house and jumped me from behind, slitting my throat. Despite losing a lot of blood, I didn't die. I didn't even feel that bad, so while he was trying to break into her house, presumably to kill her too, I grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk of my car and beat him until I passed out. When I woke up, I wasn't thinking clearly, so I went inside, cleaned myself up, and drove to the hospital. My cousin wasn't even home at the time. She had gone into the city with her mother for the weekend to see a show and go shopping. My attacker and I ended up in the same intensive care unit. I had rendered him a quadriplegic. There was a lot of legal drama to deal with, but in the end, I was cleared of any wrongdoing and he was put on probation for 10 years. Since he was no longer able to take care of himself, his lawyer, who was provided by his wealthy family, convinced the judge and prosecutor that he was no longer a threat to anyone, and the state would be better off not having to provide him with the around-the-clock care he needed if he wasn't sent to prison. I was left with massive debt that took me many years to pay off. I did sue him for the injuries I sustained, but despite being from a wealthy family, he had nothing. He had blown his trust fund on drugs, alcohol, and gambling, and his family provided him with everything, including his lawyer. He died around the same time his probation ended. Story 19. When I was 11 years old, my 16-year-old stepbrother started sexually abusing me and my 8-year-old little sister. We had just moved in with him and his family, and it was 5 states away from my mom. We didn't know anyone, and my dad thought it was great that my stepbrother was spending time with me and being a nice older brother. After about a year, I started to realize that this was seriously wrong, and I began to fight back. One night, I just got fed up and told him no, and that I was going to tell my dad what was going on. He started to strangle me, and I believe he would have killed me if my dad hadn't come stumbling home from the bar. The next day, I told my mom what happened, and she told my dad. After talking to my sister, my dad sent us on the next flight home to live with our grandparents. He said he tried talking to his wife about it, but she called us liars. He stayed married to her for a few more years before getting a divorce. I've only seen my dad about 15 times since it happened. I've never really told anyone about this besides my partner, because the one person I expected to be there for me really wasn't. I feel like he betrayed me and my sister. He may be able to drink himself to forgetting, but I can't, because I have a scar on my neck as a constant reminder. Not sure if this counts, but another time, a drug addict found the home I had made for myself inside a hedge and wanted very much to stab me. But he was pretty drunk, and it didn't work out for him. He just left after I took away his knife and kicked him a few times. It was pretty shocking for me and was the incident that got me working on getting my life back together, starting to work again, and finishing school. Story 20. When I was living overseas, a man broke into my apartment. He came in through the window of my studio apartment around 5:30 in the morning. Thankfully, I was already awake. He started to attack me and tried to strangle me. I was able to fight him off by getting my feet up onto his chest and pushing with all my strength. This happened a few times. The only thing he would say was, "You die, you die." He was skinny, and I don't think he was very prepared, and I don't think he expected me to fight back. Partway through this, when I realized he wasn't giving up, that's when I really started to get scared and think I needed a plan to get out of there. My friend lived next door, so I decided I was going to make a run for it. Once I stood up, he ran back out the window. I grabbed my glasses and my phone and ran to my friend's apartment. Thankfully, she was awake. I told her what happened, and she was like, "You have to call the police." By this time, shock was starting to set in, and for some reason, my brain was telling me, I'm okay, so nothing happened. She kept insisting that I needed to call the police. I decided to call one of my coworkers who spoke English really well and ask her. This coworker was horrified at what happened and immediately said she was going to call the police for me and call me back. Once the police arrived, she acted as the translator to tell them what happened. Story 21. I don't personally remember this, and only found out the story after I told my mom I have a fear of looking out windows at night. Apparently, when I was 3 or 4 years old, I was in the kitchen with my mom one night when a man came through the kitchen window and tried to stab her. My father ran in with a gun and shot at the man. The man climbed back out the window, and the police never found him. Another time, when I was 13, we lived in an apartment complex that my father owned. At night, the laundry room needed to be locked up and the change emptied. There was usually around $100 in change. I would normally lock up the laundry building around 10 p.m. It was a really rough neighborhood, so my father had a large dog, a Rottweiler Malamute mix, and he was trained to walk with me everywhere. I was a very small girl, and I'm sure that dog was a big deterrent for a lot of people. Anyway, one night I go out to close down the laundry building, and my dog won't come inside with me. He is barking up at the sky and won't follow any command I give. I cleaned up the building and gathered the coins, and the whole time my dog is standing by the door looking up at the sky. I lock up the door and turn to leave, and a man jumps down off the roof. He has a huge knife in his hand. He yelled something over my dog losing his mind, barking and growling, and he had a crazy messed up grin on his face. He then tried to run at me, and my dog jumped up on him. I ran back to our apartment, and my dog stayed back to fight him. I told my dad what happened, and we ran back to get my dog. We found my dog stabbed 3 times, and he needed to be hospitalized for days at the vet. He pulled through and lived many more years. They never found the guy. Story 22. My older sister was incredibly abusive towards my family, but especially me. I'm away now, so no worries. When I was 14, our dad and her were having a really petty argument that just exploded into her trying to kill him while he tried to defend himself without hurting her. She tried to stab him 3 times, but thankfully failed as my dad was able to disarm her. I could only watch this whole thing happen, completely frozen. She then turned to me and let out a horrible scream that I will always remember. She grabbed a knife off the floor and lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. She swung the knife towards my eye while screaming something about taking my eye. She kept pushing the knife towards it, but I managed to put my hands over hers and pull it off. My dad also tried to pull her off, but when she got like this, she had this crazy, powerful strength and could barely be moved. The knife then cut underneath my eye, nearly hitting the eyeball. As usual with these events, nothing came of this, and my mom and sister still tell me that I had some glandular issue, and that's how I got the scar. I love both of my parents very much, and we still have a good relationship. However, the way they dealt with and still deal with my sister was, at best, awful. When I say that I was abused by my sister my whole life, I'm talking as far back as when we were babies. We're only 2 years apart. My dad has never been physically abusive like my sister, but his behavior is often erratic and overly explosive. My dad has had a long line of mental illness run in his family, so it's likely my sister has inherited it from him. She either used to bully me or bully my dad because she has a control complex and wanted everyone to let her do whatever she wants. I think there's a selfishness from my parents for sure, and I think they're aware of this. Nobody wants their kid to be the crazy one who got arrested. It seems like a stupid thing to state, but presumably once you're a parent, your attitude changes. Fighting back only made it worse. There have been few times where I've had to physically fight back because if I didn't, I would have been killed by her. If I ever beat her in a fight, nothing would happen. Just the same stuff the next day. Abuse was my life. It still is. If nobody is hurting me, then I have to hurt myself. It's the way my brain will work for the rest of my life. I'm actively trying to get better, and I am healing, although very slowly. I left the city for another when I was 21 to pursue university. That's when I knew I could feasibly get out and never talk to her again. I blocked her number the moment I moved in. I still haven't spoken to her since June of 2019. Story 23. My ex-boyfriend was using meth, and he held me hostage for a few days. On the 6th day, he decided that I was going to die. He made me write a goodbye letter to my family. It wasn't a suicide letter, just a goodbye letter. He wanted everyone to know that he killed his cheating whore of a girlfriend. By the way, I wasn't cheating on him. He was just so delusional from the drugs. I took forever writing the letter because I couldn't stop shaking, and I was also trying to stall and figure out what to do. He sat there with a gun, watching me. He finally said I was taking too long and went, "I'm going to the bathroom. When I get back, this better be done." Well, this was the first time I wasn't tied up. So the minute he was out of sight, I bolted out the door. I was barefoot, but I ran as fast as I could to the neighbors. My kind neighbor let me in and called the cops. The cops got there, but my ex was gone. I haven't seen him since, and my dad and brother went to collect my stuff from his house a few days later. I'm not sure if this is considered attempted murder. He did beat me for those 6 days, but he never tried to actually kill me, I guess. But when he was sitting there with a gun, making me write that goodbye letter, I fully believe he was going to kill me. Story 24. This story isn't about me, but about my dad when he was in his early 20s. He was in a band, staying in a hotel with his girlfriend at the time, when he woke up in the middle of the night to someone trying to rape her. He pushed the guy off and they started to fight. He tells the story in a funny way about how they fought through the hotel, out onto the street. Long story short, the guy ends up stabbing my dad 11 times and leaving him to die on the sidewalk. A stranger was walking his dog at 5 a.m., calls an ambulance and keeps on his way. They come, save my dad, reinflate his lung, and he survives. The attacker gets caught and thrown in jail. They find out he had gotten out of jail just 2 days prior to the attack for stabbing someone else to death. Fast forward a couple more years, and my dad is playing in a band in a bar owned by his buddy. He spots the guy who stabbed him. He tells his friend who owns the bar that the guy has to go, because that's the guy who nearly killed him. The stabber gets kicked out and was found hanging in his hotel room the next day. But wait, there's more. 35 years later, my aunt moves to the city we live in and meets up with someone on a dating app. It turns out to be the officer who responded to my dad's attack when he was a rookie. So, a lifetime later, my dad gets to shake the hand of the cop who helped save his life nearly 4 decades earlier. Crazy stuff. Story 25. My ex-boyfriend was not well. He was my first serious boyfriend when I was 18 and 19 years old, and he was so abusive to me. He, his friend, and I went to Walmart one day. His friend said something that made me laugh, and my ex got out of the car and left. We had to go everywhere looking for him. When we saw him, he threw his phone at the car because I was in the passenger seat. I got one of our mutual friends who I had known a lot longer, and we went looking for him. He was at his friend's camper, sitting in the dark and holding a gun. When I walked up, he pointed it in my face and racked it, definitely loaded. Our mutual friend ended up getting between us and was able to take the gun from him. The guy stalked me for a while afterwards. Then about a year later around Christmas, I got a call that he had been murdered in Georgia and dumped at a construction site. Apparently, he had been trying to take drugs and money from 3 people who ended up killing him quickly. To be totally clear, he did a lot of horrible things to me and said a lot of awful things. His death was probably one of the happiest days of my life because he had always told me he would finish me off if I came back to my hometown. Luckily, he had gotten into bath salts and went completely crazy and ended up dying exactly how he always thought he would. Call me heartless, but I missed seeing my grandma one last time out of fear he would find me and I'd never see her again. Story 26. My drunk ex-husband came home in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. He was upset with me for some unknown reason and got on top of me in bed and strangled me to the point where he thought he had killed me. When I regained consciousness, he was sitting on the side of the bed crying. He had choked me so badly that I had broken blood vessels in my eyes. I never spent another night under the same roof as him, and we divorced soon after. It was a terrifying experience. But I'm glad I was able to get away from that situation and leave him. No one should have to endure that kind of abuse. Story 27. My then boyfriend threw me to the ground repeatedly and then strangled me until I lost consciousness. He left me for dead in the middle of the road. An eyewitness was so upset by what they saw that they flew in from hundreds of miles away to testify in the trial years later.
It's gonna break some
I don't remember most of the encounter, which is a common side effect of strangulation. But they had all the pictures of my injuries, and the coroner also testified that my injuries matched those they usually see on people who have died. However, my ex-boyfriend was in the military, and this was in a military town. He got up on the stand and argued that this was self-defense, even though he was 6 inches taller than me and at least 40 pounds heavier. The jury let him walk on all charges. He has since been promoted in the Army, while I still wake up with nightmares about being strangled. It's not fair, and I'm still trying to recover from the trauma of that horrific incident. No one should have to go through something like that. Story 28. My father had several mental disorders, which I later learned about. He tried to murder me when I was 9 years old, after years of physical, mental, and emotional abuse. His mental disorders included anger issues, bipolar disorder, PTSD, and paranoia. He would tell me all the time that he hated me because I looked like and reminded him of my mother, who divorced him after he hit her. His abuse continued for years because he told me that if I told my mom about it, he'd kill both of us. My mom was unaware because he had only ever hit her once, so I don't think she realized he'd abuse his own child. One day, he was especially bad, and I remember having multiple fractured ribs, a fractured collarbone, and several bruises and cuts. By this point, I was already watching horror movies, and all I could think of was get a knife because the damsel in distress always goes for a knife. I managed to get some distance between us by running inside, and I went straight to the kitchen and grabbed a big butcher knife off the counter. I got down on my knees and elbows to use my body to hide the knife. I heard him stop behind me, and when I saw him lean forward, I turned and lashed out at him, leaving a sizable gash across his face. It didn't kill him, but he died when I was 13 due to a heart attack. That was the last time I saw him, other than when I saw him in court for my mom to get full custody. She asked me during the hearing about the gash, and all I said was, I cut him. But I think she put the pieces together because she never pressed me further about it. Story 29. My twin sister and grandfather were killed during a home invasion. I should have been there, but I had left to give a drinking friend a ride home. When I came back, there were police, tape, and ambulances. It was a home invasion that had gone wrong. They were both killed execution style. My sister was only 30 years old. I love you, Grandpa Felix, and the other half of my soul is already in the afterlife with Amelia. It's a senseless tragedy, and I can't imagine the pain of losing both of them like that. My heart goes out to you, and I hope you can find some peace, even though I know the grief must be overwhelming. Story 30. When I was 7 years old, I made friends with a neighbor girl, and we would often have playdates. She had an older brother, around 17, who would babysit us during these hangouts. One day, my parents let me go over to their place on my own, as their house was really close to ours, but the brother was the only one home. He assured me that his sister would be home soon, and then he lured me out to the backyard. The house was completely fenced in, and the backyard had a tree line surrounding it. He told me to wait by the swings, which I did, and all of a sudden he charged at me with a sledgehammer. I fell on my back in fear, and his swing landed between my legs into the ground. I ran as fast as I could back to my house. To this day, my parents say it was just horseplay, but I will never forget the look in his eyes after he missed his swing. It was a terrifying experience, and I'm not sure why my parents didn't take it more seriously. Story 31. This didn't happen to me, but to a girl I went to school with. Her deranged uncle broke into her house, dressed as a FedEx driver, while her parents were running errands. When her mom and dad came home, they tried to wrestle the gun from him, but they were both shot and killed. He then made all 5 of the kids lay on the floor as he shot them one by one. The bullet meant for my friend only grazed her hand and head, and she played dead. She was the only survivor. She came back to school the next year, but people were horrible. There were nasty rumors about how she made it up, faked it, and how it was her fault. It's just awful that she had to go through such a traumatic experience and then face such cruelty from her classmates. Despite everything, she's now engaged and in college. She's one of the strongest people I know and such a kind person. It's really sad that people can be so horrible, especially after someone has been through something so horrific. Story 32. In 1998, I was walking with two friends to the corner store after school. After leaving with an armful of snacks and candy, we were about to cross the street. The next thing I know, I'm waking up in the hospital. Come to find out, I was hit by a loaded Mack truck going 30 miles per hour. The kids that were with me told the police that I ran into the road, turned around and taunted them, and that's how I got hit. I was only 10 years old at the time. When I was 20, I learned from a mutual friend that one of the kids who was with me had actually pushed me into the traffic. He was someone I considered a good friend back then. It was really tough going back to school just a few weeks after the incident. Even though I recovered well from the 2 skull fractures, the rumors at school and not knowing the full truth were very troubling and weighed on me heavily. The person who pushed me is now in prison on counts of aggravated assault. Unfortunately, he wasn't charged or tried for what happened to me when I was 10. The local police refused to reopen the case, even though it's been 20 years. I'd feel a lot better if I could get justice for what happened to me. Story 33. I'll never forget the strange luck that kept me alive. It all started with my childhood friend, who was like an older brother to me. He lived next door, and he was always so quiet and shy, but he always looked out for me. If I ever got bullied or things got rough, he'd be there to protect me. One day, when I was in 6th grade and he was in 8th, everything changed. He skipped class with a couple of his friends and went to the bathroom. That's where he snapped. He stabbed his friends to death with a pair of scissors. He was on his way to my classroom when a teacher stopped him. That's when they found the list in his backpack, with my name and the names of a few other kids from our friend group. He was tried as an adult and sent to prison. While he was locked up, he wrote me several letters apologizing for what he'd done. A few years ago, he got out, but he didn't stay free for long. He took his own life shortly after. To this day, I struggle with being around strangers, and things like playgrounds make me incredibly uncomfortable. Now that I'm starting a family of my own, I worry that my kids might have friends where something like that could happen without any warning. It's not easy, but I have to keep going, despite the strange luck that kept me alive. Story 34. The strange luck that kept me alive happened during my first year of college. I was living in the dorms with 3 roommates, and a few months into the first semester, one of them had a mental breakdown. He tried to strangle me while I was sleeping. I woke up to his hands wrapped around my throat, his knee pressing into my chest, and a crazy look on his face. I tried to push him off me, even clawed at his face, but nothing worked. My eyes started to dim and my hands felt heavy. I thought I was going to die. Luckily, one of my other roommates wasn't asleep. He was just lying in bed, looking at his phone. The sounds of our struggle caught his attention, and when he saw what was happening, he pushed the attacker off me and knocked him to the ground. He woke up the other roommate, and together they restrained the attacker on his bed and called the campus police. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, and after we told them what happened, they called the real cops. My roommate was arrested and taken to the police station, where he had another breakdown and bit one of the officers. He was then transferred to a psychiatric facility, and he was also expelled from the university. Even though I'm safe now, the whole experience left me shaken. I still have trouble trusting people and feeling comfortable in my own home. But I know I'm alive because of the strange luck that kept me from becoming a tragic statistic. Story 35. It all started when I was attacked in a friend's house by her ex-husband. He was a violent, unstable man, and that day, he did the unthinkable. He slit my friend's throat right in front of me, and then he turned on me, slashing my face with a box cutter. The pain was excruciating, but I fought back, trying to defend myself. That's when he hit me over the head with a plate, knocking me unconscious. But even that wasn't enough for him. While I was out cold, he lit the entire place on fire, with us still inside. I don't know how, but I managed to wake up and drag my friend outside, where a neighbor called the police and an ambulance. The authorities caught the ex-husband 2 days later, as he was trying to commit suicide in a motel. We both survived the attack, but the physical and emotional scars will last a lifetime. The man is now serving a life sentence, but that doesn't erase what he did. I still have trouble trusting people and feeling safe, even in my own home. But I know that I'm alive today because of some strange, unbelievable luck. It's a miracle that we both made it out of that nightmare alive. Story 36. The strange luck that kept me alive is a testament to my strength and resilience. It all started with my father, who tried to choke me to death. But I fought back, beating him up until he never put his hands on me again. The physical abuse may have stopped, but the emotional and mental torment from my parents continued. It took a huge toll on me. I struggled with PTSD and alcoholism for years, until my father finally passed away from cancer 12 years ago. That was a turning point for me. After he died, I got sober and haven't had a drink since. I started seeing a therapist and taking medication to manage my mental health. I also got involved with support groups like AA, and now I work with other addicts and abuse survivors, trying to help them heal. My mother, who was also abusive, died a few years later from a heart attack. But through it all, I never gave in. I survived, I grew, and I healed. And now I'm using my experiences to make a difference in the lives of others. If you're someone who has survived attempted murder or any kind of abuse, know that you're not alone. It doesn't have to rule your life forever. With the right support and determination, you can heal too. I'm living proof of that. My strange luck kept me alive, and now I'm thriving. Story 37. The strange luck that kept me alive is a harrowing tale of survival. It all started when my step-parent tried to strangle me. As their hands wrapped around my neck, my strength and vision started to fade, and I felt like I was about to lose consciousness for the last time. But then, for some reason, they let up just a little bit. The next thing I knew, I was in another room with a locked door between us. I have no idea how I escaped. It was like something primal took over. I can only guess that my step-parent might have had a brief moment of clarity, realizing they could end up in jail or lose the financial support of my biological parent. Or maybe they just thought the deed was done. They tried to break down the door, and I considered jumping out the window to try and reach the neighbors. But I knew they'd catch me before I made it. And they might even go after the neighbors too. And if I left, my biological parent would be in danger for sure. The bruises from their hands on my neck lasted for weeks. I had to wear a scarf to cover them up. And to this day, my step-parent is still with my biological parent, like nothing ever happened. It's a miracle I'm alive, and I'll never know for sure what saved me that day. But I'm grateful for the strange luck that kept me from becoming a tragic statistic. The experience has left its mark, but I'm a survivor, and I'm determined to keep moving forward. Story 38. It all started one morning when I was working from home. Around 8 a.m., I heard a knock at the door. At first, I ignored it, hoping the person would go away. But after a minute, I decided to open it. To my surprise, it was my neighbor, someone I had only spoken to a few times before. He seemed surprised to see me rather than my wife, who he was expecting to be home. He noticed I had a new car and asked if he could take a look at it. I agreed, but asked him to come around to the garage instead of coming inside because of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we looked at the car, I could tell the neighbor was acting strangely. He kept one hand in his pocket the whole time, and he kept inching closer to me, even though the garage was small and we were already in close proximity. Then he pulled out an open soda bottle, filled with a suspicious-looking tan liquid, and offered it to me. I politely declined. After a few more minutes, he asked to see the gauge cluster in my car. As I sat in the driver's seat to show it to him, with the door open, he suddenly pulled out a large hunting knife and held it to my neck. I immediately grabbed his wrist and slammed him against the wall, and we began to wrestle. During that 30-second scuffle, it was a miracle I wasn't stabbed. The blade grazed my stomach multiple times, but I managed to grab the knife and force him out into the driveway. Even then, he tried to act like he was just showing me his knife, and I almost started to believe him. I was so shocked and confused. I called the police, but I was too afraid to actually make the call. My neighbor started asking me suspicious questions, like if I had a security system, and I lied and said yes. Eventually, I went back inside, but I didn't close the garage door because I was worried he was still there. Sure enough, when I went to leave for work, I saw him hiding behind some boxes in the garage, staring at me. I ran back inside and called the cops again. This time, they arrived and arrested him. It turns out he had brought zip ties, vodka, and a note that said, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." He was there to murder me or my wife. He was charged with 3 felony counts, and he's now awaiting trial. I can't believe I survived that encounter. It's a miracle I'm still here today, thanks to some strange, unbelievable luck. I'll never forget the terror of that morning, but I'm grateful to be alive. Story 39. I remember that day vividly when my biological father was strangling me on the floor. The blood from his eye, where I had been gripping it, was dripping onto my face. My tongue was sticking out of my mouth, and the pain was excruciating. Suddenly, he was 3 feet away from me. I guess he thought he had killed me, but by some strange luck, I had survived. That day changed me forever. As I was gripping his eyelid, trying to hurt him enough to make him stop, I realized that I should have stuck my thumb into his eye. I was being strangled to death, with no chance of getting him off of me, but I still couldn't bring myself to hurt him that badly. I wasn't able to protect myself. After that, I learned so much about the ways we manage abuse in our own minds and the lasting impact it has on us. When my abuser finally went to prison for abusing me, I was left homeless and had to deal with so much more trauma. But I'm so grateful that I got out, because I wouldn't have survived otherwise. Either he would have killed me or I would have killed myself. I want you to know that if you're in a similar situation, it's not your fault. Your parent is the adult, and they're the one who made the choice to abuse you. It's not your job to stay there for their sake. They have more power than you, and they're supposed to be keeping you safe. You need to get out of there in whatever way you can. Speak to a social worker about emancipation, or look into programs like Job Corps if they're available in your area. And don't hesitate to reach out for help or just to talk to someone who understands what you're going through. Story 40. I wasn't the intended target, but I could have easily been killed that day. I worked at a small family-owned bicycle shop, and the boss was a pretty nice guy, or so I thought. It started out as a normal day. I was rearranging the displays, and the boss's wife and kids were there too. Suddenly, the shop door slammed open, and someone opened fire with a pistol, unloading the entire clip directly at my boss. As soon as I realized what was happening, I dropped to the floor on my stomach and waited until I heard the gunman running away. When I looked up, the damage was devastating. My boss had been shot multiple times in the head and chest, and he was clearly dead. The boss's daughter had been hit in the upper arm, and his wife had broken her arm diving to the floor. I can still remember the deafening sound of the gunfire and the chaos that followed. It all happened so quickly, but the images are burned into my memory. I was just an innocent bystander, caught in the crossfire of a targeted attack. It's a miracle that I made it out unharmed, but the emotional scars from that day will stay with me forever. I often wonder what could have provoked such a violent act. Was it a personal vendetta? Or was my boss caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? The unanswered questions and the senseless loss of life make it all the more difficult to process. In the aftermath, the community came together to support the family and the shop. We held vigils, organized fundraisers, and tried to make sense of the tragedy. But nothing could undo the damage that had been done. The family's lives were forever changed, and the shop never quite recovered. As I reflect on that day, I'm filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. I'm grateful to be alive, but I mourn the loss of a good man and the trauma inflicted on his loved ones. It's a stark reminder that violence can strike at any moment, and that we must cherish the people and moments we have, for they can be taken from us in the blink of an eye. Story 41. My cousin's story is one that still haunts me to this day. She was married to a man who was absolutely insane, though we never suspected it at the time. In fact, we all felt sorry for him when his previous family tragically died in a house fire. Little did we know the horrifying truth behind that tragedy. After years of enduring his abuse, my cousin finally mustered the courage to leave him. She took her 2 kids and got out of there as quickly as she could. But in the rush, she was missing important documents like their social security cards and birth certificates. Later on, when things had cooled down a bit, my cousin arranged to go back to their old house to gather the rest of her family's belongings. Her ex-husband insisted that she bring the kids, claiming he missed them. Thankfully, she had the presence of mind to leave the children with a friend instead. When my cousin arrived at the house, her ex-husband flew into a rage that she hadn't brought the kids. In a twisted, premeditated plan, he shot her 4 times, twice in the neck, once in the face, and once in the arm. He then turned the gun on himself, attempting a murder-suicide. Somehow, by some unbelievable stroke of luck, none of the bullets struck any major arteries or vital organs. My cousin was able to make it to the neighbor's house and get help. She survived the harrowing ordeal, while her ex-husband did not. The whole situation has left me reeling. Knowing now that the previous house fire tragedy was likely not an accident, but rather a cover-up for his murderous intentions, makes my blood run cold. My cousin's unwavering strength and will to live in the face of such unimaginable horror is both inspiring and heartbreaking. This experience has changed my cousin forever. She's had to rebuild her life from the ground up without important documents and with the trauma of nearly losing it all. But through it all, she's proven herself to be a true survivor. Her story is a sobering reminder that evil can lurk behind the most seemingly innocuous facades, and that we must always be vigilant in protecting those we love. I'm just grateful that my cousin is still with us, against all odds. Her resilience and determination to keep going, for the sake of her children, is a testament to the incredible power of the human spirit. This is a story of tragedy, but also of triumph, a reminder that even in the face of the unthinkable, there is always a glimmer of hope. Thanks for listening to these regrettable recaps. Please like and subscribe if you'd like more of this content in the future. And watch the video that's on your screen now for more regrettable recaps.